Welcome, confidential listeners, to another entry from our private archives. This is a space for the unspoken, for the deep dramatic secrets that carry a heavy emotional weight. Tonight's story was sent to me by someone who witnessed the ultimate game of chess between greed and legacy. A witness to a slow-burning revenge that smelled of expensive whiskey and old motor oil. It's a tale of a man who knew he was dying and a woman who couldn't wait for him to go. A diary of southern shadows and bitter ironies, titled A Snake in Savannah. So, close the door, turn down the lights, and listen closely, because the audience for this truth is only you. I believe we all have that one person in the family who is pure light, someone whose laughter stays in the room long after they've left. For me, that was my Uncle Otis. He was a giant of a man with hands calloused by years of building an empire from nothing. He always smelled of gasoline and those heavy, expensive cigars he only lit when he was winning. At 46, Otis found out he was sick. He didn't like details. He didn't want our pity. He just said he was taking care of business, while his eyes, usually so sharp and bright, began to hold a weary, distant glaze, like a pilot looking at a storm on the horizon. Otis was the backbone of our family. He helped my parents buy their house. He gave his two sons their own homes when they turned 18. He handed them the keys with a rough pat on the back and told them that a man's character is built on what he earns, not what he is given. The Riverside estate wasn't just a piece of land. It was the beating heart of our family. Once a month, like clockwork, we would all gather there, drawn by the smell of hickory smoke and Uncle Otis's booming laughter. I can still close my eyes and feel the humid breeze rustling the Spanish moss while the kids splashed in the pool and the adults sat under the shade of the ancient oaks. Otis was the main attraction. He'd sit in his oversized wicker chair, a cold beer in one hand, spinning the same tired old stories we'd all heard 1,000 times. But we didn't laugh at the jokes. We laughed at him, at the way his face would turn bright red and how he'd slap his knee before he even reached the punchline. Those barbecues were our sanctuary. Otis had this way of making everyone feel like they were the most important person in the world. He'd walk around checking on every cousin, every aunt, his presence acting like a warm blanket over the entire yard. Just thinking about those golden afternoons brings a lump to my throat. It was a place of pure, unfiltered joy, where the only thing that mattered was the blood in our veins and the man who made it all possible. But as the sun began to set on Otis's health, a new shadow crept into his mind. After 10 years of mourning his wife, he suddenly decided he didn't want to die alone. He wanted to feel a woman's touch again, to have a partner to share his final sunsets. We were terrified. My cousins and I knew how innocent he was when it came to the heart. He was a man who couldn't hear a sad story without opening his wallet. That's when Celia appeared, like a predator who had been waiting in the tall grass for the wind to change. She was a woman from his past, a high school flame who had once treated him like he was invisible. Now she was divorced and working at the bakery across from his station, watching him with cold, calculating eyes. Every time Otis pulled up in his truck, she would cross the street with a smile that never quite reached her eyes, smelling of expensive perfume and cheap intentions. To understand why this hurts so much, you have to go back 30 years. I can almost see young Otis, his heart on his sleeve and grease under his fingernails, standing in that high school hallway. He was holding a bouquet of wildflowers, his hands trembling with the hope that only the young and innocent possess. He walked up to Celia in front of everyone, his face flushed with a nervous grin. But Celia didn't just say no. She took those flowers, the ones he had carefully picked and tied with a piece of twine, and tossed them into the trash can without breaking eye contact. The sound of that bouquet hitting the bottom of the metal bin was the loudest thing in the room. The laughter of the other kids followed him for weeks, and Otis didn't show his face at school for 7 days, hiding his shame in the shadows of his father's garage. And yet, here he was, 30 years later, letting that same woman back in. It was as if he had forgotten the sting of the trash can. Or perhaps in his final days, he was just desperate to believe that even the coldest hearts could thaw. When Otis finally made the relationship public, the air at our riverside barbecues changed instantly. The warmth of the grill was replaced by a chilling frost every time Celia walked onto the porch. She had nothing to her name, but she carried herself like the Queen of Savannah. She would look at our family through narrowed eyes, her lip curling in a subtle, almost imperceptible sneer as she sipped her wine. To Otis, she was all sweetness, a calculated performance of affection. She would stroke his arm and laugh at his jokes, but her eyes were always wandering, scanning the property, calculating the square footage of the house and the value of the silver on the table. We all saw the mask slipping. She was a scavenger waiting for a titan to fall. My mother tried to warn him, her voice hushed and urgent in the kitchen, but Otis wouldn't listen. He was intoxicated by the attention, or maybe he was playing a game of his own that none of us understood yet. He started taking her everywhere, spending money like water, while Celia stood by his side, her false smile stretched tight over a face that was already dreaming of the day the lawyers would call her name. The laughter at the Riverside estate began to fade as the truth about Otis's health could no longer be hidden. He had stopped his treatments, choosing to live his final months on his own terms. I remember the day he moved into the mansion full-time with Celia. The air felt thick, like a storm that refused to break. My cousins were furious. They saw their father slipping away into a world of constant parties and reckless spending. Otis was throwing money at musicians, premium whiskey, and elaborate dinners as if he were trying to burn his empire to the ground before the fire in his lungs did it for him. Celia was always there, hovering like a vulture. She played the part of the devoted wife in public, but behind closed doors, we heard the way she spoke to him, sharp, demanding, her voice cutting through the humid night air like a blade. She was convinced she was the new mistress of the estate. I saw her once, standing in the middle of the grand living room, touching the antique furniture with a greedy reverence, already imagining where she would place her own things once Otis was gone. As Otis grew weaker, his behavior grew more eccentric. He started treating Celia like a high-priced servant, demanding she cook massive Southern feasts for the whole family every Saturday. He would sit at the head of the table, his eyes sunken but dancing with a strange, secret light, making her serve everyone while he cracked jokes at her expense. He'd slap her on the rear in front of our aunts, bragging about the services she provided. We saw the flash of pure hatred in Celia's eyes, a look that could have killed. But then she would force a smile, a tight porcelain mask of tolerance. She endured it all because she thought she was winning. She thought every humiliation was just a small tax she had to pay for the millions she was about to inherit. Otis even started stopping by the local pharmacy where I worked, buying blue pills with a wink, telling me it was Celia's night to show her love. He was playing a role, a man obsessed with pleasure, while she was a prisoner of her own greed, counting the days until his cough finally stopped for good. She didn't realize that while she was waiting for him to die, Otis was busy making sure her future was already dead. The end didn't come with a bang, but with a quiet, rattling breath that was lost in the sound of the river's flow. Otis finally let go on a Tuesday morning. The mansion, which had been filled with the forced noise of his final parties, suddenly became as cold as a tomb. My mother cried for 15 days straight, a raw, gut-wrenching grief for the brother who had been her protector. But Celia was a different story. She wore her widow's black like a trophy, her eyes dry and darting around the house, already mentally tagging the items she would sell. She stayed in the Riverside estate, refusing to leave until the inventory was finalized. I saw her pacing the porch, a cigarette in one hand and a glass of bourbon in the other, looking like a vulture waiting for the lawyers to bring her the golden carcass. She truly believed she had won. She had endured the jokes, the demands, and the services she provided, and now she was ready to be the richest widow in Savannah. She didn't know that the storm Otis had been brewing for months was about to wash her away. The day the lawyers arrived was a gray, humid afternoon that felt like a funeral for hope itself. Celia sat at the head of the long dining table, her posture rigid, a smug smile tugging at the corners of her mouth as the first envelopes were opened. But then the room went silent. One by one, the truth began to emerge like skeletons from a closet. The 2 gas stations, the crown jewels of Otis's empire, had been legally transferred to his sons years ago, long before Celia had even re-entered his life. Her face turned a sickly shade of ash. The Riverside estate has been bequeathed to his sister and her 2 brothers to be kept as a family sanctuary. Celia nearly had a heart attack right there in the grand dining room. The mansion she had already planned to remodel was no longer hers. The bank accounts were nearly empty. Otis had spent every last dime on those final parties and luxury whiskeys. She was left with nothing but the clothes on her back and the echo of Otis's laughter in the halls. Or so she thought, until the lawyer reached for the final small envelope addressed specifically to her. The lawyer's hand hovered over the final envelope. Celia's eyes were bloodshot, her hands trembling as she grabbed the paper, hoping for a hidden diamond, a secret fund, anything. But as she read the words, the air seemed to leave the room. Otis had left her a 2020 pickup truck, the one he'd beaten to hell on the back roads of Georgia. It wasn't just a truck, it was a wreck. The engine was smoking, the transmission was slipping, and the side was crushed from an old accident. Worse yet, it came with 2 years of unpaid taxes and fines that exceeded the vehicle's value. But it was the note attached that destroyed her. To my beloved Celia, I leave this truck for services rendered. You are always a great workhorse. She screamed, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage that echoed through the halls of the house she would never own. She had given everything, even her pride, even her body, to a man who saw her through from the very first second. Otis wasn't a fool. He was a master. He used her greed to buy himself a comfortable end, and then he tossed her out like that bouquet of wildflowers 30 years ago. And that is where the letter from Otis's nephew ends. A story of a man who played the long game and a woman who lost her soul for a mirage. It's a bitter pill to swallow, isn't it? Greed is a hungry ghost. It makes you blind to the truth until the trap finally snaps shut. But now I want to turn this over to you, my confidential listeners. Was Otis a hero for his revenge, or was he just as cruel as the woman he fooled? Leave a comment below. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your secrets closer. Good night.